Welcome to the Global Discussion, a discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, a real pleasure to have Erica Orange on the show. Erica, you're very welcome. Let's start by getting you to introduce yourself to our worldwide audience. Over to you.
Fantastic. Simon, so happy to be here with you. Good morning, at least on my end. And I love that we get to talk about all things the future because that is what I live and breathe on a daily basis. I have been doing this work as part of the Future Hunters and a partner in the firm for, my goodness, I feel like I'm dating myself, but close to 2 decades at this point. And it really just stems from the place of curiosity. How do all of these signals interconnect? What are the interrelationships between trends? And then it's really then my job to understand what all of those ripples of change are leading us to or not leading us to, and just helping not only companies and organizations see around corners, but really sift through all of that noise that's out there today.
Well, thank you, Erica. That kicks us off nicely. Now, you mentioned future hunters, and you say nearly 2 decades at this stage. Um, how did Future Hunters come about, and what is it actually involved in today?
Yes, so we are a family business. I always joke there is no separation of church and state. Very early on in my career, just being out of college a few years, my now mother-in-law, one of the early pioneers in the field of futurism, Edie Weiner, really introduced me to this way of just starting to spot patterns, challenge my own value judgment, start just kind of putting all of those puzzle pieces together, and told me, again, I was in my early 20s at this point, to just start kind of challenging my own mindsets. And she's like, it's going to take you a handful of years to really just kind of rewire your brain and train your eyes. And now, fast forward a handful of years, my husband Jared is my business partner. Some people wonder how we make it work. It honestly is one of the best parts of our partnership because it really is a partnership. We live and breathe all of these things again on a daily basis. So I think having that interrelationship personally and being able to really dig into some of these kind of unknown topics, meatier topics, being able to bounce them back and forth is one of the things that's kept us around for so long.
Thank you, Erica. And look, for people watching and listening to this episode, you are a renowned futurist, and you've been involved in this space for a good amount of time, and you have some great insights on this. Now, we've got to talk about AI because everybody talks about AI, but you've wrote the book, and your book is AI and the New Human Frontier, and you talk about reimagining the future of time. You talk about time, trust, and truth. Now, that sounds like an awful lot going on in a book on AI, but could you maybe give us a little bit about what made you write the book? Where's it coming from? And just give us a little bit of an oversight into why this is an important book.
Yeah, so my interest really in every single trend area I look at is what is the impact on us? What is the impact on humanity? And oftentimes we look at the change and all of the kind of big areas that are happening in technology, whether it's the future of AI, data, sensors, virtual reality, all of these kind of new buzzwords. And we don't pause and think, how do we separate out the hype and the reality? And ultimately, how do we approach all of these things through the lens of human centricity? And this has been my interest going back even before I learned of the world of futurism when I was studying psychology in college. And it was always that interest in what are our own motivations? What are our expectations? How can we live and work very differently? So I have been really digging into AI really for the better part of the last decade and a half, because at the heart of it, AI is nothing new. It's just that the pace of change has accelerated so much around it, and it's almost leapfrogging itself. But the time aspect is really interesting because we have a term in our shop, we call it templosion. And really, what templosion is the fact that the biggest of things and the biggest of events are happening in shorter and shorter periods of time. So we feel as if we are navigating the world almost as if we're on steroids. At the same time, everything's getting more and more truncated. The time horizons are starting to collapse. And we saw the early seeds of this going back as far as around 2008, when we reframed what was happening as the global recession as the global transformation. And we knew then that this transformation was ushering completely new understandings of time. And again, whether it's strategic planning cycles, financial planning cycles, even the way in which we understand generational change, all of these time horizons are starting to collapse. So that was really kind of the impetus around the time piece. And Simon, I'll kick it back over to you because the other two T's, the trust and truth, became part of a framework I created several years ago, just really kind of on a quest to understand what are the new luxuries, what are the new currencies, and what are the new value propositions. And in writing the book, I realized all three really foundationally underpin the creation and the development of all of the new facets of AI that we are seeing today.
Yeah, you made me really think there, Erica, when you were talking back about when we were sort of forced through pandemic and everything to change the way we did business globally. It sort of wasn't a discussion, you just had to adapt. And when you talk about it in that context and where we are today with I can see how time, trust, and truth come in. But if I'm reading it right, you really come at this from a how does it help human creativity, right?
Yes, because I kept coming back to the same central question that I asked myself in writing the entire book, which is, do we believe in the progress and the potential of people and in humanity as much as we believe in the potential of technology? And there are so many people, all of the accelerationists who are very bullish on the pace of technological change. And then, of course, there are the decelerationist who then posit this very dystopian future. And I liken it to two DNA strands, right? Hype and reality today are so deeply intertwined. And we need to just kind of get our fists around each one of these strands and pull them apart to say, yes, we are in a massive hype cycle. And we know this. At the same time, AI isn't going anywhere. It is here to stay. And I was also interested in asking the question, what is it that AI can do, but equally, what is it that AI cannot do? So it was from a place of neutrality and also knowing that given this pace of change, right, it's almost cliche nowadays to talk about the pace of change and our ability to adapt and adjust to it. But we're not going anywhere. Humanity's not going to be rendered obsolete despite all of these kind of doom and gloom calls of, a full AI and robotic takeover. We still are going to need to work, live, function as families, as communities, as neighborhoods, as cities, as rural, whatever it is, we are still going to be around. And the other thing we also need to understand is that even given the pace of change and all of these forces around templosion, there is that equal counter trend. And we're seeing that counter trend rise up in response to the trend, which is the fact that not all change is fast and not all change is happening equally, right? It's the quote that everybody likes to go back to, that the future is not evenly distributed. And the same is true of AI and AI-based adoption. So it really is just coming at it from a much more pragmatic perspective and not getting into the weeds about where AI, what the next iteration is, right? It's not what the next platform is going to be, who is the next company that's creating something. It is how do we double down on our most unique human qualities and rethink, especially, how we educate and teach the next generation that is quickly moving into the workplace and who will be working very symbiotically around these technologies. How do we get them to think analytically and critically about their interrelationship with AI?
It- It's a great point, and I think, when you talk about human intelligence versus artificial intelligence, and you're using words like you just did about critical thinking, the word empathy comes up too, doesn't it? In terms of, human empathy. And I also want to go back to something that you touched on earlier. Um, you were sort of implying that we're all swimming through this hype wave of technology and AI at the moment. That's what it feels like. Some
Oh,
of us are
yeah.
swimming elegantly, some are drowning. But when it comes to technology, we've also got to talk, I think, about real, fake, what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. Because you talk there about the lines are blurred, and having to get your hands on what's real, what's not real, and that's becoming harder as the tools are getting better. Am I right in saying that?
You're spot on, Simon, and this is the rabbit hole that I go down, and then it ends up usually with a glass of wine at the end of it because I don't want to be one that is kind of presenting this very scary narrative, especially in this podcast today. But I really do believe that outside of a lot of the challenges with the climate and climate related issues, and this is the longer term future we're talking about, that the assault on and the degradation of the truth is going to be one of our deepest, deepest existential challenges because we know that we are living in a world that I outline in this book of NDMD. So NDM, right, is out there, misdis and malinformation. We know that to be true. I'm in the States, and I mean, 50 democratic countries have gone through elections this year, and a lot of it was influenced by NDM. But that last piece, which is the last D, which is digitally derived information, and that becomes a very slippery slope because it's getting harder to tell who or what increasingly is creating much of the narrative that is out there. And I liken it to navigating much of the external environment as if we were in a Carnival Funhouse, right? Remember those Carnival Funhouses, and you'd go in and there'd be all of these mirrors and you'd see all of these versions of yourself. And in many cases, that is what the world is looking like to a lot of us. We don't know if what we are seeing, reading, hearing, or being told is true. And the bigger thing is that it's getting harder to prove any of these things to be true. And I dig into a concept, I didn't create it, but it's called the liar's dividend. And it's kind of like the emperor with no clothes. Remember that when you were a kid? And it's the more that you actually prove something to be fake, the more people believe in its validity. And 73% of people believe what generative AI wants them to believe. So there is a massive opportunity in this to really start thinking about how we teach the youngest of generations, going down into Gen Alpha. And as the mother of a 7-year-old, I think about this all the time about how to really start thinking critically about their sources of information, getting them to look with a critical eye at something that could be a deep fake. Because one of the things we really have to double down on is how we ask questions through the lens of human oversight, human judgment, and asking the questions that really matter. So it's something I feel very passionately about, again, as a futurist, as a mother, to really get our current educational system aligned with where we know all of these things are undoubtedly moving.
I love the picture you painted of the sort of house or room of mirrors where everything is slightly distorted, bigger, smaller, fatter, thinner. And it is a great analogy to use. And also, what you're talking about, asking questions, and I immediately sprang to mind something that somebody said to me many, many years ago, that typically the better the question you ask, the better the answer you get. And yeah, I really like what you're saying there. Let's move it on a little bit, Erica, because I also want to ask you, in your futurist role, a little bit about your own future and a little bit about what you think is on the roadmap for the year ahead. What does the next 12, 18 months look like? What's on your horizon? What are you thinking about at this moment in time?
So I'm at two ends of the extreme. What I'm thinking about are all of the things that I write about in the book, right? Through the lens of optimism, through the lens of hope, through the lens of imagination and curiosity and true human to human connection. I look forward to many opportunities throughout the year to connect, uh, either virtually, like we're doing right now, or in person with other actual humans. I was asked, I remember 10 years ago when all of the hype was around VR. It's like, well, is this going to replace conferences and in person networking? And no, it's like, do you understand the future at all? Things never operate in a pendulum, swinging back and forth like that. So I'm interested in really kind of cultivating that hope because there is a lot to be hopeful about. Now, you juxtapose that on what is happening globally. And I think I think over the next 12 months, and I'm not just speaking as someone who is based in the US, but as someone who is looking at a lot of the ripples of geopolitical change right now. My neighbor to the north, I'm in Rochester, New York. So my neighbor to the north, I mean, Trudeau is now resigning. We are seeing a very interesting rock, paper, scissors game played, and we don't know kind of how this trifecta really long term is going to play out. And the rock, paper, scissors is the rise of the billionaireocracy, the rise of autocracies, and the creation and development of AI. And these three pillars are wielding new forms of power, creating new power structures. We don't know who or what is influencing who or what. And it's an interesting chessboard that we are moving into. We are seeing this at play in this country. We are seeing this at play in countries all across the world. The maps are being redrawn, but it really comes down to this game of, right, the rock, the paper, the scissors of these three forces. And I think that these three are going to really kind of play these games that we're not sure. I cannot predict it, right? I don't have the crystal ball, but I have my eye on kind of what those longer term ripples are going to be as we see new forms of both hard and soft power wielding.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving us those two perspectives, and I think that global perspective too um,
That's right,
is
Simon. We can talk about all the buzzy stuff. We can talk about the rise of AI agents, and we can talk
yeah,
about the rise of AGI, and if it's possible, if it's here yet. And those are good conversations to have, but those are hypey conversations to
yeah,
have.
yeah,
There is something that is happening that is above all of that. Uh, and again, it's a restructuring of a lot of what we thought we knew. Uh, and again, nobody can really predict what the world is going to look like, what certain borders are going to look like, what the future of warfare could look like. There's a lot of interesting things that are just happening in the world of sensors and drones and AI that we're just at a very interesting point there.
yeah. I couldn't agree more, Erica. And I think it's as though change is here, bigger change is coming, and we're not really sure what that looks like. But I shall remain optimistic. I think is the best position to be.
You can only remain optimistic because this is a moment in time, in a period of time that has spanned millennia. And we, as the human species, have been through even more fundamental moments. So the only way to move through is to be hopeful and to know that we still have agency, right? That's not going anywhere. And I have to really truly believe that we're not going to have AI overlords. And we really do have the power to shape our own realities. Uh, but there are a lot of massive macro changes that are going on that have been the word I'm looking for, that have kind of faded into the background in favor of the buzzy, the cool, the now. It was like going on LinkedIn at the end of the year and everyone's creating their trend list going into 25. And there's nothing really new in a lot of that, right? It's more companies will adopt AI. Humans are going to have to upskill. We know all of that. So I just have my eye on some of those bigger changes that are happening kind of in both the foreground and the background, right? So as a futurist, you cannot get stuck in just that hype spiral.
So
Got to
I
see
don't
the signal through the noise.
I love that. And I don't want to drag you into that hype cycle discussion, but I do want to go back to you mentioned agentic AI and everybody's talking about agents. But I heard Mark Benioff, the chair and CEO of Salesforce, speaking recently. I'm sure you did too, where he was talking an awful lot and is talking an awful lot about digital labor. And then you've got others like Elon Musk talking about agents. And, some predictions are that there's going to be billions of agents and maybe more agents than there are humans on the planet. And I would just love to get your perspective on it's not, I suppose it's a bit about a future of work question, but we are seeing the rise of, I suppose, nodes and workflows behind the scenes, which are agents that are more and more capable as the weeks click by.
Yes, and I go back to a point that I oftentimes make about the symbiotic relationship between humans and technology. And if we give them carte blanche to make decisions for us, to work independently, we don't necessarily know what some of those second and third order consequences are. So I really double down on that point of human oversight, that yes, these are still great, and it's going beyond a tool, right? It's kind of cliche to just say they are just tools, because they are making decisions. They are making decisions for us, both consciously and subconsciously. Even one of the concepts I write about in the book is the rise of subliminal intelligence, and the fact that a lot of uh, kind of the power that it yields, especially on the agentic side, is the fact that it could subliminally, right, beyond the conscious level, influence how it is that we purchase products, how we make decisions, without our conscious knowledge that it is happening. Now, at the same time, I mean, it would be great to have an agent, right, book a lot of my travel, help me create agendas for certain things, help me figure out a weekly kind of lunch packing schedule for my second grader. All of that is great. That's the freeing up of time. But it does then kind of ask that question of, if they are doing all of these jobs, what do we do? Right. And that is why for every single industry, every single company, it really comes down to reallocation. And it comes down to thinking of how you deploy human time and talent in new ways. And a lot of the jobs that humans are going to occupy have not even been created yet. So we can say that they're going to be in more creative job functions. And that's great, but what are some of the positions around that? And maybe humans are going to be the ultimate project managers, right? It's not going to be about one linear career anymore. And it hasn't been for decades. And that is a fallacy. And that's a whole other conversation around demographics and life stages and work. But maybe it is less about jobs and more about jobbing, having a series of different jobs and tasks across your lifetime as AI advances.
Yeah, I really like that. And going back to that term I was saying earlier about digital labor, there is a current conversation going on about managing humans and also managing digital labor and what those workflows mean, and that the humans of the future will need to be able to do both, and they're both going to be as equally important, which I think is fascinating.
10 years ago, Simon, I created the term neo-humanic workforce. And I said, and people are like, that sounds very sci-fi. And HR departments thought I was crazy. And I keep doubling down on this point. And I said the neo-humanic workforce of the future was going to be about managing carbon and non-carbon life forms, humans, and even going beyond AI, but even any sort of internally embedded systems and software, and that HR and IT as separate entities had to merge. And I don't know of any example yet of how those two verticals have really created more of a synthesis inside of any company. But as we hire who alongside of what, and it shouldn't have been now that we started having this conversation. It should have been a decade ago, so that we had the thinking now to tackle a lot of kind of those roadblocks that we see happening internally because people were woefully unprepared for a future that honestly was written on the wall. This was so easily predictable that we would be at this inflection point right now where it's not just about digital agents, it's about any sort of technological tool that is working more autonomously.
Love that. Carbon and non-carbon. Love that. And I'd expect nothing less from a renowned futurist, Erica. Of course, you nailed this a decade ago. Of course, you did. Look, finally, before I run out of time, is there anything else you want to add to our conversation? Might be something we've already touched on, you want to expand on, or something completely new, like a wrap up for our audience. And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to think about reimagining the future of time, trust, and truth, and they want to find out more about AI and the new human frontier that we've been talking about today, where's the best place to point people to? How do they get in touch with you or the Future Hunters? So, any last thoughts, and how do people reach out?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. This has been so much fun. And I would just make the point that there is so much to learn about the future, and it feels like it's coming at us so quickly. But there is a lot that we first have to forget about the future and about what it is that we know and what we hold on to. That I tell so many people in almost every single presentation and every meeting that we have to get up on the forgetting curve as quickly as we get up on the learning curve. So it's just how do we forget the things that are no longer useful and no longer necessary? A lot of the heuristics that we rely on, a lot of the judgments that we might make about AI and the future of work, and how do we clear that out to make space and room for the new and the relevant? And these are obviously topics I'm super passionate about. The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. The best way to reach out to me is either through LinkedIn or directly on my website, ericaorange.com. A lot of information on the book and some of my speaking topics and a whole bunch of other stuff on that site. Best way to get the book is on Amazon, right? Like everything else today, even though all major retailers are selling it. But I've been posting a lot of content on LinkedIn. I just encourage everyone to kind of participate in some of those conversations about the future because it is not an independent task, it is a collective one. And the more that we can facilitate those really needed dialogues, particularly at a time of more polarization, these conversations are needed more than ever today.
Well, thank you. And that brings us nicely to the end of this episode of the Global Discussion. I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening to our discussion today. I'm going to ask them to like and follow and subscribe and do all the things I need them to do to help support the show. And hopefully they'll join me back here for some more discussions with leaders, with creative people, with thinkers, just like Erica. But Erica, thank you for being on the show. It's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Simon, likewise. This has been so much fun. What a perfect way to start my day. Thank you so much.